Guys, welcome back. Today we're going to look a little more into scripting itself. I thought one thing that would be a great way to begin is looking at variables. Just because a lot of the different things that we're going to be doing within scripting once we get a little more into it are going to deal with variables. So I'm going to come over here to Gizmos and I'm going to pull up our nice little script here. And let's go ahead and pull up the properties. And you're going to find our variables back here in the little hashtag here. And then with variables, I'm also going to come over here to values and look at set to, as well as value input as well, just for the fact these are going to be the same thing as variables. So let's start off with what is a variable? Well, a variable is a predefined item. So instead of saying that we're going to, when trigger is entered by object, we're going to move an object to this location. Well, if we wanted to use self every time, we would then have to say that this trigger here, this little green trigger here, would send an event to this block, and this block would then move to where it needs to be going to. And with this idea, what we would have to do is have one script for this block. We would also have to have a different script for this trigger, and this trigger script would then change information or send it over to this block. Well, to make it a little easier, we want to condense scripts down as little as possible. So in this script, for instance, when trigger is entered by player, so when this right here is entered by me, the player, well then it's going to cause this action to happen, and these variables are going to tell us what exactly we want to do. So the number one thing is, what types of variables are there? So if we click new variable under the variables tab, we're going to see these here. We're going to see numbers, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's just that, it's a number, 1 through infinity, however many you want to do. Boolean. Boolean is a true or false statement. It'll say, is it yes or is it no? And we'll go a little further into that as well. You have object, which is just that. It's an object of some type, whether it be a cube like this, or whether it be, let's say, a gizmo, a sound. All of these items are considered objects. So if you wanted to reference any of these items within the code, you'd go ahead and put it under object. Player ID, that is going to define a specific player in the world. Whether, this player who grabs this cube is considered a bad guy, this player who grabs this cube is considered a good guy. Now you go out into the world and you can define different players by player ID. Vector is a location within the map. So for instance, it doesn't matter if the cube is located this way or rotated this way. As long as it stays in this position within the full map, it's going to keep the same vector. Rotation, it doesn't matter if it's over here or over here. The rotation, as long as it stays straight, is going to be the same. Then once you start obviously rotating it, you're going to see that changes. And we can take a look at that as well by pulling up the properties here and going to attributes. And as you can see, if I keep it in the same place, but then I rotate, the position or the vector doesn't really change. The rotation is going to do all the changing. Whereas if I keep it straight and I change the position, so I'm just going to grab this here. If you notice, the rotation stays the same, but the position is going to be doing the actual changing. So that's going to be the difference between vector and rotation, is where it is in the map as a whole and how it's situated on itself, which rotation it's going. Then you're going to have color. Color is just that. It's a color defined by 3 different numbers, red, green, and blue. And with those colors, you can basically make any other color in the world. And then string. String is just a word. That's literally all it is. It's a either a note, a word, different things like that. And now we'll go into a little more of which each one you would use. So why would you use this? Vector, for instance. If I had several of these scripts, well, if I had to say, okay, well, I want to change it to this vector here. The position is negative 36.40, so negative 36.40. 59.10 is our y, so 59.10. And the last one is negative 3.70. So negative 3.70. And what does it say? When trigger entered by player. So this is script 11. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this up here. Script 11. And let's go ahead and pull this down where we are. Okay, pretty darn close. And let's go ahead and pull this down to where we are as well. So as you can see, when trigger is entered by player, we're going to move to this vector. So the trigger is here. Well, nothing happens. Well, the reasoning for that is because we didn't tell it what we're actually moving. So if we come over here to our vectors, we're going to name an object, and we're going to say, let's call it the target, because target is what we want to move. And then we can drag it here. So now we've just told this we're going to move the target to this location. So then down here, we get this nice little target within our script that we've attached to this nice little block here. And we put it over here. Because it was set to self earlier, we actually moved, if you noticed, we moved the trigger to that location because the trigger is considered self. Whatever the script is on, when it activates it, self is considered that object we put it on. But now that we've defined target, let's go ahead and try that again. It moved. As simple as that. I touch this, it moves to that same vector. Now the problem with this though is I didn't want it to go there. I actually wanted it to come down to this area here. Well, let's see here. So position is negative 3.37.20. As you can see, I already ran into an issue. Now I have to type in the vectors all over again, which is an issue. So what we can go ahead and do though is we can come over here to new and say vector, and we'll call this vector cube location. Once we have several different locations or whatever we wanted to, we could have that number over here. So for instance, negative 37.2. I had to erase that, sorry, negative 37.2, 59.10, and negative 3.70. Instead of having to re-enter this every single time we run into this location, I can grab this vector here and just drop it over that. Now, every time you see a cube location, it's going to take it to this location here. So let's go ahead and move that back over here, and we're going to touch this again, and it put it to where we wanted it to be. Now, one of the cool things about these here, though, is these are also dynamic. They don't have to be set to a certain specific place. They can change. So, for instance, if I was to, let's say I'm going to delete this and we're going to delete this here. When object is grabbed by player, right? So when this right here, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to color this so we know which one we're actually messing with. So this is the one we're actually going to move. This one is the one that we're going to use to activate the movement. So going to script, when grab start, I want to do nothing, but when I let go of that object, I want this to move to the location I want it to go to. So when object is released by player, I want to move to this vector, and then over 1 second here. And what do I want to move? Well, I want to move the target. I want to move to this cube location, and then we can actually create a number. So instead of having to, let's say we had several of these numbers all throughout the script, well, I'm going to use the same time on all of them. So number, I'm going to name this time, and I want it to move over 4 seconds. So now, if I grab time and put it over that, that number that was 4, or was 1, I've changed it to 4, and every time you see time, it's going to change to 4. So now I come down here, I find script 11. What is our target? Well, our target is this item here. So now, when I grab it, oh, actually, we'll have to make it interactive and grabbable. Makes a big difference. When I grab this item, it doesn't do anything, but when I let it go, it moves to that area there. Well, I think that took way too long to get there. Instead of having to change this down to 2 seconds in every little piece, I can come over here, change the value to time to 2, and now everywhere in the script that time is at, it's going to change it to 2. So now, if I move this down here and come back over here, we'll grab it and let it go, and now over 2 seconds, it goes much faster. So this is really the point of using different variables, but now going back to the dynamic aspect of it. This keeps going to the same place because cube location is set to this place. Well, on grab start, let's say I want to set, and we're going to say cube location. So we want the cube location to change. We're going to actually change this here while the world is moving. And what are we going to change it to when we grab it? Well, let's go ahead and change it to, and I'm going to grab a nice little code down here under our operations and its position of object. We'll cover these in a few other videos, but what we'll go ahead and do here is object, and we're going to say new location. New location, and there we are. So what we're doing here is when we grab that object down there, it's going to change this variable, cube location, to wherever this object is, new location object. And then when we let go of it, it's going to move this target to our cube location, our new one here, right? Well, then let's go ahead and grab another shape here. And I'm going to define this. Let's go ahead and close that and reopen that. So now we have new location, which is an object. We're going to put it on this one here. And so now what will happen is if I move this, let's say right here, if I grab this, as soon as I grabbed it, that variable that's called cube location has just changed to the position of this object. So when I let go of this, as you can see, it's going to move to where that is. And then if I move this, let's say over here, when I grab this again, it just set that new location to there, and when I let go, it's now going to move to that location there. So what we've done now is we can change this variable live again while the action is happening, which is one of the things that you can do with variables that you can't do with just a regular little vector input. Vector input is static. It's the same thing every time. You can't change this in the world, right? So that's one of the good things about vector. You can do the same thing with the rotation as well. Time, you can also change as you go through. For instance, let's go ahead and get rid of these here. And what we're going to go ahead and do, let's get rid of these as well. And I'm going to create a number. And number is going to be defined as, let's say count, because I'm going to count how many times I grab that block there, right there. Well, what I can go ahead and do is I'm going to come down here to another cool little thing that we'll cover in another video. I covered a little bit of it in my video going over the gizmos. So if you haven't watched that, please watch that there. But what we're gonna do is display text when we let go of the object. And so string, we were looking down here at string. If I wanted it to say a certain thing, so let's say calculating, period, period, period. Oh, actually, let's do that again because that was the name of it. But now what is the string actually doing? Calculating. I'm going to name it calculating. And so now anytime you see this string, instead of having to type it in dynamically here, I'll just type that in. And now calculating will display this text here on. And I have to give our text block again, it's an object. And I'm just going to name it text. And then if I pull out our gizmos here and go to our text block. Now, I don't want to go over too much in the actual texting itself. The main aspect of this whole thing is going over just the variables. So I'm going to skip over a lot of steps that we're going to do in this here. But the reason I want to do this is because now, every time I let go of that block down there, this one here, and I'm going to get rid of all these here. Every time I let go of that block there, it's going to display this string calculating. And actually, I want that to happen every time I click on it. And then every time I let go of it, so when I grab it, it'll say calculating, but when I let it go, what it'll display is our count, whatever this number is. And right now, the number is 0. And then I also have to define what we're going to put it on. So now, if I come here, we have our nice little script, and here's our text block here. Let's open it up and put a text on it. Here we are. So I grab it, it says calculating, I let go of it, it says 0. I grab it, it says calculating, let go of it, it says 0. So those I've done by putting the variables of calculating, which is a string, it's this here, or display the number count, so the number is 0, on text. Well, I don't want this to stay at 0, so what I can go ahead and do is I can go back to that cool little set button, set to, and I'll put it right here. And I want to set our count, so I want to change the value of count, our variable, to something else. What do I want to change it to? Well, I'm going to grab an addition operation here, there we are, and I'm going to say I want it to be whatever count is, but I also want to add 1. So I can either do new variable and just change it to number 1, or in this case I can go to value, number input, and put it here as well. So everything under variable, you can just set one instance of under our values as well. They're one and the same. The only difference is these, you have to change each one individually, whereas variables will stay throughout the whole rest of the script. So this one here, I'm going to say 1. So now what this says is every time I grab that block down there, it's going to display calculating, which is a string, on the text. And then it's also going to change count to whatever count was plus 1 on top of that. Then when we let go, it's going to display what the new count is that we just set on the text. So now I grab it, it says calculating. When I let go, it says 1. I do it again, I grab, it says calculating, and in the background, it just added 1 to whatever count was set to, which was 1. So now it says 2. And every time I do that, it'll go up. So again, all these are variables, or all these are dynamic, where they can change to something else. And so you'll kind of want to play with them. Color, let's say we want to say red, well, RGB, so red is going to be this one here. And then we also want to say color blue. And so RGB, blue being the end, we're going to change that to 1. And now we have two different colors. Well, let's say we wanted to use action and we wanted to paint object. So paint object and paint object. And because this script is on this block, it's okay if we use self because that's what we're actually painting. And what are we painting? Well, we can put in the manual numbers there, or we can come back to these here. When we grab it, we want it to turn red. And when we let go of it, we want it to turn blue. So I come back down here, my red block here, I grab it, it's red already, it says calculating, I let go of it, it turns blue. I grab it again, turns red, let go of it, turns blue. So that would be the whole point of the colors here, because you can redefine them and again, drag them to where you need to be. So now instead of a script that looks like this, let me see. So let's use trigger. When trigger is entered by object action, we're going to display with text. So I'm going to do the exact same thing here. We're going to display this word here on, well, in this case, you have to have an object or else it'll say just self by itself. But then again, you have to have self on the object that you're messing with. So you would have to have several different scripts instead of doing all these things all within one script. Next one is set to. Well, if we didn't have variables, then set to wouldn't count, so we wouldn't even have that part. Color to red. So we'll come over here and we would have to go to paint object. One is red, so this would color it to red. And then when grab end, we want to display count on text. So we would have to have another one of these here. But instead of this here, we would have to then come up here, click number input, put it right here, and then we'd have to say, okay, well, we want it the number 2. And again, we can't change this now because it's already set to something. Whereas a variable, it changes. So instead of having a nice script where we can see, okay, we're displaying calculating, which is a word on text, we're setting count to whatever that number was plus 1. If we didn't do that, then we have something that looks like this. Well, we're displaying a string, which is text on itself. We're displaying color, which is 1. Instead of knowing what we defined them as, now we're just looking at numbers on self, and we're displaying this number on self, whereas before we knew it was count. This number, what is this number? What does it refer to? I don't know. I just know it's the number 2. So variables just help you clean up your script in that aspect of it. One of the last variables that I want to go ahead and cover, just because a lot of these are self-explanatory or explanatory now that we've covered a lot of this, is the boolean. Boolean is one of the questions that I've had a lot of times. So we can say, for instance, grabbed. Well, let's change that back. Let's say grabbed 5 seconds. And so what we can do is, let's say that this coloring here, where is it? Blue, there we go. So I'm going to delete that. So color it blue if we let go of it. Well, if you grab it, it's going to color it red, but let's say we don't want it to color red if somebody already grabbed it within the last 5 seconds, right? So what we could go ahead and do is say that this Boolean, it says, is it true or false? Well, I can come up here to set to. When we grab it, it's going to automatically set this one here, which is set to off by default, to on. So we can either put another variable in here, or we can just go to this Boolean here and say we want it to turn it to true. Well then, after 5 seconds, um, let's say we want to put this down here. After 5 seconds, what we're going to do is come over here and send event with delay. It's going to be called my event to self over 5 seconds. So now that we set this to true, after 5 seconds, it's going to send this my event, and we're going to grab this nice little set here, and we're going to set this back to false. And the reasoning for that is because this here, the coloring red on self, I'm going to put if. I'm going to put this under if, and I'm going to say if grabbed 5 seconds is true, we're going to color it red when we grab it. If I did not grab it within the last 5 seconds, it's not going to turn red because this is no longer true. And I've told it already that when I grab it, after this happens, we're going to set it to true. And then after 5 seconds, it's going to set it back to false. And so that's how we know whether or not this is true or false. So what will happen here is, let me find it. I grab it. And because we grabbed it in the last 5 seconds, it's turning red. If I wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I come back to it and grab it, it doesn't turn red because I didn't grab it in the last 5 seconds. But if I let go, I've grabbed it in the last 5 seconds, it now turns red. So that's what one of those booleans are for. It just tells us whether or not an event or whether or not something that you wanted to happen is true or false. So grab 5 seconds, because it's false, it's not going to actually do the next script that's underneath it. Whereas if I grab it, let go, it won't reset it back to false for 5 seconds. So if I grab it again, it's going to say, well, yeah, that's true because we already changed it to true. Let's go ahead and do it. I know this was a little more confusing than I actually originally wanted it to be, just because we're actually getting into a little more scripting. And so the main portion of this, I want to reiterate, is just what variables are for. Don't worry about the display on the text. Don't worry about the coloring of an object. Just worry about you can set colors. You can set a string or a word to send. You can set a number. And not only can you set it before everything starts, but you can set it to something else when the game is going. That's the main takeaway of this whole video. And then as we go through the series, we're going to go a little more into the displaying and explain a little more about what we're doing there and cool little tricks that we can do, as well as a lot of these other different options here, because there's just so much in here that we can go over that we're going to go ahead and cover later within the series. So thank you again for watching there. I hope you know a little more about variables, and now that you know more about variables, let's go ahead and dive a little deeper within the scripting itself. We'll see you next time.